the March 10th, 2021 virtual planning commission meeting. Let's go ahead and get a motion on the table for the approval of minutes for the January. Do we need separate motions or do both under one?
Separate motion.
Let's see.
Okay, so we'll do the first motion on the January 13th, 2021 minutes.
Chair, I move that we approve the minutes for January 2021 as written.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
All right. Got a motion by Commissioner Watson, a second by Commissioner Saldivar to approve the January 13th, 2021 minutes. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right. Motion passes unanimously with 2 absent. Get a motion on the February 8th, 2021 minutes.
I move for approval.
I'll second.
Okay, got a motion to approve by Commissioner Kelly and a second by Commissioner Saldivar to approve the February 8th, 2021 minutes as presented. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously with 2 absent. Okay, appearance of interested citizens. I don't see anybody in the gallery. Do we have anybody that you know of, Shane, that expect?
So we have Jamie Davis, who is listening in for the traffic, bike, and pedestrian committee, but nobody contacted us to sign up to provide testimony ahead of time or anything like that.
Okay, city attorney, there when we were making the motions, you said something and I didn't quite catch it. I'm sorry.
I don't think I said anything. We did both. We did both minutes, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah, I think we're good to go.
Okay, fair enough. All right, so let's move on to the new old business. So Shane, you're going to talk to us a little bit about the work tasks, then dive into sort of a 10,000-foot view of House Bill 2001. We'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Shane.
All right, thank you, Chair Lawyer. Yeah, so I mean, in all seriousness, I think that tonight's meeting primarily we wanted to talk about kind of the upcoming year, something we normally do in January because of other public hearings and an HNA BLI meeting in February. It's now March and we're just getting there. So I don't know. It's 2020 redo. Everything is weird. That's what I'll say. It's my fault. But before we dive into kind of what we're doing this year, I just wanted to kind of really commend all of you and your service on the Planning Commission. I thank you for all of your guys' work. And looking at what we completed last year, which I included in there, which I always like to include just so we can feel accomplished. We actually did quite a bit in the midst of a COVID year where we missed multiple meetings and there were just the weirdness of what our lives are. So thank you very much for the work that you did in the past year. Really, it's commendable. So great job. With that being said, I'll dive right into the list. And I'll just kind of walk through them really quickly and give opportunity if you have questions on what they mean. One thing I kind of wanted to set the stage. In many years, we've had a very kind of finite, text amendment, text amendment, text amendment. And we have a few of those, but we also have some kind of bigger project things and bigger concept things that we're working through as a city and that ultimately you all are going to be working through as a planning commission, giving staff some direction as we bring things to you. Chair Lawyer, you have your hand raised. Go right ahead.
Yeah, I just want to note for the record, Jane Herb came on.
Oh, thank you. Hi, Jane. So looking at the list, I mean, first thing on the list is we already did it. In January, we did a text amendment for the composting in the IG zone. In February, we had a meeting for the housing needs analysis, buildable lands inventory, which I'll kind of jump in and just give you a heads up. I'll remind you at the end of the meeting too. But I just heard from our consultant like yesterday and chatted with or emailed with Chair Lawyer and Mayor Clark today. We are going to be having our second meeting of the completed HNA BLI documents, and that's going to be on May 19th. We were going to try to do it on our regularly scheduled Planning Commission meeting on the 12th, but unfortunately the consultant wasn't available that day. And due to budget cycle and some other work sessions that are already tagged, we've got to do it in May because the project needs to be done by June. So this is kind of the official notice a couple months ahead of time that our May Planning Commission is actually going to be on the 19th. It will be a Zoom. It will be at 6 p.m. and that will be for the joint Planning Commission and City Council meeting for the housing needs analysis and buildable lands inventory work. So that, that's obviously we're doing an update to our numbers. I'm going to be sitting in on a webinar next week, next week. I was going to say it's not this week because it would be tomorrow and it's not tomorrow, but I'm going to have some indication. It's PSU's putting it on, so we should have a better indicator on what population projections look like, which if you remember from our February meeting, that's kind of one of the pieces. We have to wait for that number before they can crunch all the numbers in the study. So just so you know, that will be coming back in May, and we should have a pretty good look at what our needs are in the planning horizon in May. So the other thing on the list that's kind of a big project is a possibility of a transportation system plan update. I got notification last week. Actually, as I was preparing the packet to send out to you all, I got an email that the transportation growth management folks through the state are opening the grant cycle. So this month I am sending in basically a pre-application request to talk about doing an update to our PSP. Now, realistically, that would be work that would probably, if we get grant funding and get approved, that's not going to happen until sometime in the summer when we hear if we get the grant, and then it normally takes some while with contracting and things like that. So it may or may not be things we do this year, but what will happen there is that's a big project, probably an 18-month to 2-year process to do a transportation system plan update. And there will be an advisory committee and things like that, and planning commission will be represented as part of the team. And then also we will have to bring the actual study and the process through planning commission as well. So that's something we've been kind of eyeing for the last couple of years, and we are keeping our fingers crossed that the timing will be right for us to get some funding for that. The other thing is, the next thing on my list is the implementation of this House Bill 2001, the middle housing bill. I put in your packets a bunch of information. It's the OARs, the Oregon Administrative Rules, as well as the model code that was required by the rulemaking. I've provided that mostly just to simply get it to you so you can start kind of consuming it, reading through it, looking at it, and formulating the questions that you might have to get back to me on those. I'm not intending tonight that we do a deep dive or really get into it. I do want to kind of give some high-level highlights, but I'll do that at the end of kind of our list, because primarily what I really am looking for tonight from an action item perspective is the work plan that we've come up with in line with what you all want to see us be working on, and or are there modifications or additional items that I haven't hit on that you want me to bring to Planning Commission. So we'll circle back on that House Bill 2001. The other thing that we believe is going to be coming up, and it could be tomorrow, it could be a month from now, but we've had multiple inquiries about city properties and non-city properties up in the Keizer Station area. So we have a possibility of, frankly, having to process maybe a new master plan for Area A, Area B, and Area C. I think the probabilities for the Area A and the Area B are a little lower. Go ahead, Shanna.
I just want to point out, it's the Area A Sports Center area next to the stadium.
Thank you, Shannon. Yeah, thank you.
Be affected at all?
The main part of area.
Reflection of the conversation about the compost thing.
Yes, in part, and some other conversations as well. Okay. So, again, that's pretty infantile stage. Frankly, I don't know that the Area A and the Area B discussions that may be able to be accomplished with simply an amendment, which would go straight to council. But those are still kind of a bunch of moving parts. The one that I am fairly confident that we're going to see, though, is the Area C one. I've had a developer that's reached out to us a while ago, and they've hired traffic engineers. They have regular civil engineers on board. So I expect that we will actually see some movement on that because they bought up property to do something. So, and that based on the initial conversations we've had, it would be a significant enough change to Area C that in conferring with the city attorney, we don't believe it's something we can process as an amendment. We think it would actually be a new master plan, which with any new master plan, it comes to Planning Commission first for a recommendation to council. So that's something that I don't have a great feel as to when that may be, but when that comes in, because of 180-day rules and things like that, it will become prioritized to get it on the agenda as quickly as we can to meet all of the state mandated timeframes. So the next one on the list is a text amendment, and it's for the RCOD zone. We may talk about that in April at our April meeting if we choose to have an April meeting. Basically, what that looks like from staff's mind is, when we adopted the RCOD zone and the Keizer revitalization plan as a whole, we as a city, through updating our comp plan and the zone code, identified that area is intended to have more intense redevelopment than maybe everywhere else in Keizer. And so now, that zone's been in place for a little over a year, and we've had 3-4 projects, I think, that have come in. And one of the things that's been identified pretty much consistently with all of those projects is there is some inconsistency with the language in the zone versus what was intended. Kind of two primary things that I've found in the process-wise side of things. One is parking. In the River Cherry Overlay District, we adopted a reduced parking standard for single-family dwellings, for apartment complexes, for everything. But and it really is an oversight based on kind of a Scrivener's kind of error. We did not create a category. Our consultant did not create a category for parking on access easements, whereas our general parking standards have two separate standards. You have your standard for a single family home, and then if you're on an access easement or a street that doesn't allow parking, we require one additional space. So what has ended up happening is on these more compact developments, we still have to roll back and have them require 3 full spaces plus their garages, which is, we believe, to be not the intent of that RCOD zone. So I am looking to bring a text amendment to you all to consider aligning that parking reduction basically at the same level in the RCOD as it is elsewhere through the city, but it would be a net reduction. So that's one element. And then the other element we have that we've run into a couple times, and I think it's fitting with understanding how the middle housing bill is going to affect us, but also just that understanding that the RCOD zone has been vetted as this space for additional development. We have in our code a section that pertains to infill development standards. And it kind of speaks to what Commissioner Watson had brought up at our September meeting about kind of neighborhood compatibility things. And so one of the things is, in existing neighborhoods, when a development comes in, we require an infill redevelopment plan that tells us how tall buildings are going to be, and we cap the building heights at no greater than 5 feet to any existing homes that are around them. And so that's created and posed somewhat of an issue for folks because of new lots that are smaller, having to go a little bit more vertical, frankly, construction methods that are different now. People aren't building 312 roofs anymore. And so it will be my recommendation that we don't apply that additional infill rules to the RCOD zone specifically. I still think it's appropriate for the other neighborhood areas that are not within the RCOD zone. But I think that with that revitalization plan, frankly, I think we should have been looking at that and considering that. but it's like any text amendment that we do, I've learned over the years, I deal with it every day, but until I start processing applications, I don't always see or recognize the inconsistencies between the rules and the intent of those rules. So that one, I think that one makes sense for us to revisit that, and just, it's a minor tweak, but I think it would be more in the spirit of what the intent of that revitalization plan was intended to do. So anyway, so that's one of the text amendments we have identified. There's another one that kind of came up real recently, and it was kind of driven by the fact that the Marion County surveyor is a different individual who's the head of the survey world. And we had found out that we'd been doing some things historically, like the whole time I've worked here, like 20 plus years, that we were having people record some documents ahead of time that really they shouldn't have been. But surveyor didn't care and we didn't really think about it. And so it kind of changed the process in the way we plat partitions and subdivisions. And so I had to involve the city attorney. We figured out a different way around it to make sure that the maintenance provisions of those private facilities are guaranteed. So that's not a big issue, but in digging into it, we realized that our code is deficient in technically requiring maintenance provisions for things like no parking signs, required screening, address display signs, and some things like that. So again, it's a pretty minor tweak that we'll need to make, but it is one that's now been identified. So we'll be bringing that to you fairly soon. It's kind of I may try to wrap it in with, a couple text amendments that we'll just kind of get before you and get it done. And so, frankly, probably with kind of the next one on the list, which is we realized that due to some specific developments in town, there was a bit of a loophole between the Marion County Building Inspection Division and City of Keizer Planning Department when it comes to our ability to enforce or require businesses or commercial projects to finish their projects. So we had a building permit that basically was opened and never got their final inspection approval or certificate of occupancy for I think it was pushing on 3 or more years. So we need to kind of close the loop on that. Ultimately, our city attorney had to get involved with the property owner and their attorney, and it came to a good completion. They were a good partner. It wasn't a huge issue, but again, it opened up kind of a can of worms that we went, wow, this could be a bigger issue if we don't get this resolved. So that's another item on the text amendment list. And then kind of the other text amendment I've identified at our September meeting last year when we talked efficiency measures, it was definitely the messaging I received from Planning Commission was definitely that we want to take a cautious approach. We don't want to stick our necks all the way out there on just going hardcore and, taking the sideboards off and really pushing efficiency measures. But one of the items that we talked about as a possibility is a reduction to lot size for detached single family dwellings. Not a large reduction, but that's another one on the list that we've identified, and I'm kind of working through as to how to bring that to you all. So those are kind of the text amendments that I've identified for this upcoming year. The other, I have another little item on the list. It's just a tiny issue, and that would be the UGB discussion as a whole. And again, tongue in cheek, it's not a little issue, it's a huge issue. But I put that on the list. I don't perceive there being some major action item for Planning Commission. It's more of hey, I want us all to be aware that everything we are doing right now is related to the bigger picture of planning for the growth in the planning horizon over the next 20 years. And the UGB discussion is extremely complex. It's way above my head. It's frankly above everyone's head who does this work. That's why they all get litigated. That's why nothing gets done for years when UGB expansions get pursued. However, I kind of have it earmarked, and I don't know when. It definitely would not be before we get through the update to the housing needs analysis and buildable lands inventory. But I think that we will try to dial up a meeting where I can maybe give a presentation on what basically some of the studies are that we've already done, where we're at from a historical perspective, the work that has been done in the long range planning. And I think the hard thing, and we've talked about this before, a lot of our long range documents, you know, the reason we're updating the TSP is it's a 2009 study, so it's old. Our economic opportunities analysis is from 2013. We did a community visioning project in 2009. But those studies and those long range plans have been vetted. They went to Planning Commission when appropriate and the council, and they've been adopted. And so I feel like it's going to be an important piece as we move forward to kind of lay that groundwork to say, hey, this is what we have as a community, and whether or not any of us were here when they were done, this is what we as a community have determined is the trajectory of our city. And so then if there are things that we or you all as a planning commission say, we want to revisit this and prioritize a new economic opportunities analysis or a new updated visioning process, then I think that's something that I want to give you at least the groundwork and the kind of the high level points so that you have a frame of reference as we move forward into some of the work. So that's kind of earmarked as a possibility of one of our meetings in the upcoming 6-ish months. And then I added a little section, which is different than we've done in the past, but kind of this ongoing tasks considerations. You know, one of the things that was identified by my predecessor a year ago or more was the possibility of an employment lands expansion only for, you know, possible UGB expansion for employment lands. And the hope there was that there would be a lower threshold that we would have to achieve in order to actually accomplish that. Now, unfortunately, having additional conversations with the state and doing a little more research on that end, there doesn't appear to be much of a lower threshold. And in fact, we got some confirmation that our previous economic opportunities analysis really doesn't hold muster from their perspective because it was based on aspirational goals, not on hard data. And so there are some issues with being able to just go out and do it. So that one I kind of left in that ongoing because it's clearly a priority for our city. We know that we have a jobs housing imbalance and we need to try to right that in whatever way we may possibly be able to. Interestingly enough, I am on a rules advisory committee currently for transportation planning and climate action planning and equity. It's kind of all rolled together. It's a very highly idealized kind of concept. But one of the pieces that I think may give us some traction moving forward is the city is going to be under compulsion, it looks like, out of this bill, and it's actually a governor's executive order that's being turned into administrative rules, that we're going to have to do some scenario planning for climate and transportation and land use, kind of all three, within the region. And frankly, from my perspective, I think a very possible, although I don't want to get people's hopes up too much, but I think a good defensible argument for providing more employment lands in closer proximity to where Keizerites live is the fact that it reduces vehicle miles traveled. It will reduce greenhouse gas emissions from light vehicles, which is a huge target of the executive order. And so that may be a path forward that we can take. And I don't want to say in like a kind of like a sneaky way, because it's not at all. It's absolutely legitimate, but it would align some of the established values and priorities of the state in a way that isn't just simply Keizer saying, well, we want ours. And so I'm looking forward to those opportunities to try to have some of those conversations. The issue with it is that it doesn't look like the rulemaking is going to probably be done until around November of this upcoming year. And then after that, obviously funding has to be, it's already earmarked, but it's not 100%. And so that scenario planning process is probably going to be a bit of a process since it's going to involve the whole region. So again, it has to do with, I hate to be like, oh, we're just going to kick the can down the road. But I think in this case, we're sort of going to have to kick the can down the road until we get through those processes. So that one, I kind of wanted to put it on the list so you're aware of it. I was excited about this kind of angle of saying, hey, maybe this will fold into the climate action planning stuff and we can make a good push to say, let's get some additional employment lands for Keizer. The other one on the list that I moved into an ongoing one because I didn't want to prioritize it. If you all see otherwise, though, I'm not going to follow my sword for it. But that was the legislative rezone of the UT properties. Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Saldivar, you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
I just had a quick question. What's our region? So when you were talking about the region, what does that consist of? Because I don't know.
Yeah, so it would be the Salem-Keizer metro area. So the rulemaking has identified essentially metropolitan areas. So it's really connected to our metropolitan planning organization, which is basically the Marion County and I think part of Polk County, but the Salem-Keizer area. Portland Metro's already done scenario planning some years ago. The Eugene-Springfield area has done some scenario planning, although it's not been formalized. And then the Roseburg, Medford, I don't remember what they call that area, but they have a name for it. They've also done some initial scenario planning type of work as well. But in the bill, we are basically the #1 priority for the next in line for money and work to be done at the state level. So we don't know how it's going to work yet. The other thing just to kind of throw in there is a random kind of information. I don't have a solid day yet, but tentatively on May 25th, the Department of Land Conservation and Development is looking to host essentially a community conversation. And they reached out to me asking about different times in May, and their original dates were all budget committee days. And we were like, yeah, none of those work. So they were pushing it later. I don't believe they've landed on a date for certain, but I think they're eyeing May 25th as a meeting that they would be hosting. And I would be very much encouraging and asking you all to attend and listen in, as well as city councilors, as well as other community partners who have an interest. But they're going to be providing some information about the whole rulemaking process and what that looks like for climate action planning, the scenario planning things. And frankly, I'm learning as I go. Even though I'm on the rack, it's like we have these giant packets and we bite off little chunks and I give my input, and my input is sometimes very different than others' input. But it is one of those that they're trying to make an effort to engage the affected areas so they can get that input. And it's a big deal because the reduction targets are huge. I mean, they're looking for big time reductions for greenhouse gas emissions, and the governor's executive order it's actually identified things like maybe we need to have, this is Shane's paraphrase, but maybe we need to have people work from home inevitably because that reduces vehicle miles traveled. Maybe we need to not allow any kind of parking requirements and some things like that. So there's some big issues. The one thing that's good is Salem has already begun undertaking some pretty aggressive climate action planning. I think where they sit politically right now with their electeds, that's something that they are tuned into. So I'm hoping that some of the work they're doing, we may be able to be a beneficiary of that because it will help our region as a whole. Because the reality is that we live in a suburb and we have bad transit service, and there's not a ton of us that work here. I mean, I'm one of the few. I live and work here. And so, we don't have a ton of opportunity for us to make it better just because of naturally how we already are. And so anyway, that's just kind of as giving you a heads up. But as planning commissioners, I really would encourage you to kind of tune into some of those things, because that is some of the work that's going to be before us over the next couple of years. Sorry, I got off track there and Matt, you're right. I'm not keeping it short. I'll move on. The legislative rezone, we had identified a year ago the possibility of just rezoning, and we were doing a UT text amendment, and there was talk about, well, maybe we should just simply rezone all the properties to residential single family. Now I will take this on myself. I determined to hit the pause button on that. And there's a couple reasons why. One was primarily because of the uncertainties with what House Bill 2001 is going to do community-wide. If we were to rezone all those UT properties to RS, I know for a fact House Bill 2001 applies to all of those properties, which have some issues with infrastructure and some other things like that. By not rezoning them, I don't believe that the UT zoned properties would be considered residential necessarily by House Bill 2001, although there are some DOJ legal opinions that are supposedly going to be coming out on some different issues for House Bill 2001, and I haven't had enough time to vet that kind of discussion with my own city attorney. But that's one of the reasons why I kind of hit the pause on that, is I feel like it may just be a timing issue. Eventually it's going to happen, but if folks come in and they want to take advantage of that, we put the onus on the property owners to do their own rezones. That gives more ability for the city to exact improvements and other things that would go along with a zone change, because House Bill 2001 greatly limits our ability to require those types of things. So that's kind of why that one got moved to ongoing and not a priority in my mind for this year. But again, if you all see it differently, I don't have a problem with us dialing that up as a priority. Yeah, go ahead, Chair Laura.
So that's really interesting. I mean, because of that prohibition on zoning RS now for populations over 10,000, I mean, what are the options? Do you do multifamily? Do you do mixed use? I mean, it kind of almost makes sense just to leave it what it is. I mean, the burden then becomes on the property owners because they have to go through a conditional use process instead of just going through, you know.
And yes, and you actually said it much better than I did, Matt. Like, that's exactly why I thought, yeah, maybe we hit the pause on that, because I do think it does put the burden back on the property owner. It puts the opportunity, I won't use the word burden, it puts the opportunity back on the property owner. If they want to develop to a greater intensity, then they would be able to take advantage of that. But that process of development, either through conditional use or through partitioning or subdividing, that's where it gives us those triggers to require street frontage improvements and all of those kinds of things. So yeah, I think that's kind of why I was like, well, maybe we just leave it as is. It's still in the comprehensive plan. It's still designated for future residential development, but having an active zoning designation of just simply RS, it would open them up to being able to just like, oh, I've got a 1 acre piece of property. I'm going to build a giant cottage cluster because I can. And the city having no real ability to deal with any of the other issues, that's kind of my concern on that one. So that's, like I said, that's why I kind of moved it down on the priority scale.
So if they went multifamily, they still could do, I mean, because really that's their only
Yeah.
option. They could still do a single family dwelling, even though it's zoned for additional units, correct?
Yes. With the UT zone, you can still establish a single family home through the conditional use process. It's just when you get into the above and beyond of that, the middle housing stuff, in my initial interpretation, which I hope is correct, we'll find out as we move forward. I don't think we would have to allow all of those middle housing elements in every UT zone parcel as well.
Well, no, but I guess my question is, let me rephrase it. If they wanted to get out of the UT designation because they don't want to go through all the cup stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Their only option is to go multifamily, right?
Well, no, they could simply rezone. So they could go through a rezoning application, or they could still partition into single family lots. Right? What's that?
They can't get RS though, right?
No, they would. Right now they would automatically get RS.
Okay.
And then once it was rezoned, then they could take advantage of the middle housing provisions if they chose to.
So when is the I guess maybe I'm confused. So, so when does the ability to zone residential single family change?
So it doesn't really change that. It just simply, that was kind of like how the House bill was, I guess, marketed in some ways with the death of residential single family zoning. So it doesn't really change the fact that you can have a residential single family zone. What it really says in the administrative rules is that in that single family zone, wherever you allow a single family dwelling, you also now are going to have to allow a duplex.
Okay.
And on lots of certain sizes, you will have to allow cottage clusters, townhouses, triplexes, and fourplexes. And so, and I'll dive into that a little bit at the end, just kind of giving some highlights. I made a few notes and a few kind of stickies on the intriguing elements. And so what my point was is with holding off on rezoning all those UT properties to RS, I think it gives the city a little more ability to ensure that a proper level of improvements are provided as properties develop, and that they can be future, redeveloped to greater densities in the future. But if they were all already RS and it was an outright permitted use in the zone for a single family, then June of 2022, most of those UT properties, because a lot of them are big, I mean, compared to urban standards, all of those would be able to just simply come in and do, I'm going to build a fourplex and I don't have to do anything. And so that's something that I don't think is necessarily appropriate for the development pattern in North Keizer. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. Does that answer it, Matt?
Yeah, thank you for helping clarify that.
Sure.
It was helpful to get that clarification because I think there's a lot of folks that don't understand that, just as I didn't, that RS still didn't exist. So that was helpful.
Yeah. Commissioner Saldivar.
Okay, so all right, I just make sure I understand. So the concern that we had is if it goes to RS, people can make these changes without doing like sidewalk and curb and gutter and road improvements that we would want them to do. That's the holdup that we're talking about, right?
Quite possibly.
Yeah.
Although again, I've just got a couple more things on my list, so I'll hit those and then we can dive in and we'll talk a little House Bill 2001.
Right.
So, I had a couple other things. The storm drainage text amendment, I think that's been on our list as long as I've worked here. It feels like, our environmental division, they are always busy. They have a permit for all the stormwater that goes to the river. DEQ's involved. It's a whole big thing. We have identified, and I've talked with the environmental division manager multiple times over the last couple of years, and there is kind of a known commodity that we need to do some changes within the development code to connect some of their rules with our rules to make it clear for developers. They are still in the process of formulating exactly what those look like. Once they get to that point, I would expect they will come and they will be the lead person at our planning commission meeting to talk about why we're doing what we're doing. But that's completely dependent on them, which is why I kind of moved it to ongoing. I'm going to quit saying it's going to happen this year until I actually know it's going to happen. And then we had identified one last year with some changes in the building code that we might need to change our wireless telecommunication facilities section to deal with cell towers and some things. Although based on some recent conversations I had with the building official and with the city attorney, we are actually pursuing trying to address that in a different avenue through just an ordinance, which is what the county ended up doing. They just didn't bother telling us that they did it that way. So anyway, so that one I kind of moved off the list because I don't think we're going to need it at all, but I didn't want to eliminate it from my own memory because, if it goes off the list, I just will straight up forget about it forever. So I left it on there for Shane, but kind of letting you guys know, I don't think we're going to have to tweak it. I think going the ordinance route makes way more sense because it gives us the ability to still require permits. And then the last thing on my list is the legislative rezoning of properties that were identified in that Keizer revitalization plan, kind of the upzoning of some of those parcels, either from RS to RM or RM to mixed use. And this was specifically on the list for the Don Earl piece and the Don Earl piece and possibly the manufactured home park piece. that were large RM pieces, and the concept was to upzone those to mixed use as part of the revitalization plan. Obviously, at the time of adoption, council didn't want to pursue that at that time. There was some talk about whether or not the city wanted to initiate and go through a legislative process. Ultimately, we've had some different ongoing conversations, not so much with the manufactured home park, but I've talked with Mr. Earl a few times, and I feel, there's no we, it's just me, but I do feel that it is more appropriate to allow that to be driven by an actual prospective developer versus just changing the zoning and it's sitting there as a vacant field anyway. So I feel like until somebody comes in with an actual development plan, it's really not the timing to upzone that until and when that happens. So that kind of covers my list. And so with that, I would love to hear from commissioners as to other items that I'm missing, other items you would like to see us work on or work toward, or any modifications to any of the listed stuff. And then I'll kind of, like I said, I can give you a little kind of 10,000, maybe a 30,000 foot look at House Bill 2001, the vast majority of the stuff I sent you in the packet. Commissioner Grants. Oh, he had his hand raised first, Shannon.
Go ahead, Shannon.
I just wanted to ask that if Mark and Francisco arranged to have the same library or not.
I think Mark's trying to say yes, but he's saying it to just the monitor because nobody can hear him.
What I was saying is that we are social distancing. We're more than 6 feet apart.
That's good to know, Commissioner.
You can tell because Francisco's is a little fuzzier. So
So there's a couple things that I wanted to touch on. A couple of you brought up, Shane, in terms of the infill development standards. You brought it up relative to the RCOD zone. I would encourage Planning Commission to consider eliminating those infill standards altogether. The reason being is the same thing for why you brought it up for the RCOD. If we're trying to get every little bit that we can out of the available properties, it makes sense to eliminate the burden of reduced height limitations just because it's under 2 acres and it's around an existing developed neighborhood. That's pretty much 98% of the redevelopment properties that we have in Keizer. So I would, that's where I would put that on my list. Kind of tangentially related to that is building heights in multifamily zoned. Our current height limitation in the multifamily zone is 35 feet. You mentioned earlier this evening that nobody really builds 312 roofs, so it's hard to get a 3-story multifamily building under 35 feet. Whereas multifamily uses in other zones, for example, the mixed use zone, I believe the height restriction in that zone is 50 feet. So
yeah, I think you're right.
A little bit of house cleaning there that I think might help get a little bit additional density out of the properties that we do have. And then the final topic that I have is site plan review process as a land use process. I think considering what HB 2001 is going to force us to allow with tries and quads, I think without a site plan review formal process, you're going to lose a little bit of control with a lot of the other zoning type things that right now it would just be allowed under a building permit and you don't really charge any real fee for that. It's part of the very minimal building permit fee process that you guys have. And I know you guys spend a lot of time on those sometimes. So just kind of something to consider.
Yeah. Would that, and Commissioner Grant's question for you on that site plan review process, is that something that you would want to see Planning Commission involved with, or just simply are you just saying just from a process perspective, something more in-house that we would deal with as staff?
Just something more process.
Okay.
Keizer is one of the few communities that doesn't really have a formal land use process for reviewing zoning code relative to allowed uses in zones.
Right.
Multifamily development. You just check off the boxes that it meets zoning code, parking. You have time that you spend on that, and you don't get compensated for it really. And I think there's some opportunities there.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, Commissioner Watson next.
There's unmute. Knew I'd find it. Thank you, Chair Lawyer. So first, I'd like to say that I agree with Commissioner Grenz on height restrictions. I would love Shane to look at the kind of limits on height and parking, but he was talking about height, so I'll talk about height, that seem likely to discourage best use, in particular talking about something that would encourage 3-level multifamilies. It seems like if we're going to be making the best use of this space, we need to make the best use of this space. I know that there's a certain level at which we will be torn apart for, people will accuse us that we're changing the look and the feel of Keizer. But I also think that we need to push the envelope, and we need to at least be willing to introduce these changes and not just assume that they'll be fought against. So just to second looking at height restrictions. And also, I'd like to say that I love our annual to-do list meetings, but this list seems a bit more robust than it has in the past. And that may be just because you're putting in a lot of the, we have the housing inventory and buildable lands inventory and all that we're looking at again in May. And we have a lot that's in the ongoing column, but it just seems like you've given us a bit more than a year's worth of work here. And I know that we'll sink our teeth into any text amendment you give us. I mean, if you plan for a half hour, we'll turn it into 2 meetings, even for just the basic stuff. So I guess I want to make sure that the list that you're presenting to us is what staff believes is, I'd like to know that it's a prioritized list, so that we can make sure that we're giving attention where it needs to be, not just attention where we like to give it, which is, again, literally anything. So if we can get some direction in this is important, this really needs to be taken care of, versus, oh, here's something that might be fun for you to talk about, I would just appreciate that guidance. I don't know if that's helpful or not, but that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Commissioner Watson, and I can spend a little time thinking that through and kind of trying to come through with, I guess, Shane's priorities on how they fall. And I would agree. The list is like, I talked with Chair Lawyer a while back, and I said, it's hard. I really preferred it when it was a list of text amendments that are very tangible, and I know I can dial them up and we can get them completed. Some of the things on this list are, they're those bigger kind of policy issues and ongoing study kind of things that are hard to quantify how much time it's going to take and when exactly they're going to be delivered. So I appreciate that, and I will look at priorities for you and try to send out maybe a modified list to commissioners. Before we leave, I did want to ask from Commissioner Watson and Grenz, you both mentioned height for multifamily. One of the items that's been somewhat identified in our initial housing needs analysis buildable lands inventory work, they look at what our current code allows, some things like that. And I also know that in Keizer, we have a little lower density provision for multifamily housing. I haven't seen a lot of projects in my time here where density has been an issue for multifamily development. I think more than not, it would have been height and parking requirements. So that would be one question I would have, is that in looking at some building heights, if I were to bring back the Planning Commission some comparables with other cities and what's allowed, do you want us to look at density as well and possibly bumping up that number?
Shane, remind me, what is the maximum density in RM zone?
So yeah, I think it's 20. It depends on the comp plan designation. Most all of our RM is medium high. And so I think it's 26, 24 or 26 units at 24. Dina's mouthing 24. So maybe it's 24 units an acre. And then we have a little bit of a bonus in the RCOD. I think goes up to 28. And then mixed use buildings, there isn't a cap, but yeah, so I know some places, I think Salem it's like 40.
No. Salem's RM2 zone, which is their higher density zone, I believe caps out at 24 or 28. I don't remember which.
Okay, so we may be pretty consistent with that zone then.
Yeah, and realistically, depending on whether or not the developer is gonna keep and manage an apartment complex, it's really hard to get a usable and practical parking ratio with a density higher than about 22-ish units an acre, depending on really how it lays out. I think 24 to 28, unless we start going to 4-story with really reduced parking, that's probably a realistic limit.
Okay, that's great. I know that's something that our consultant has mentioned to me a couple of times, of you might need to consider bumping up densities. I'm like, man, I don't know that density's been a factor for developers, but I appreciate that input, Commissioner Grants.
So Shane, Mark's had his hand up for about 11 minutes. I just don't want him to fall asleep. Do you got something?
Go for it.
So Shane, what I was looking at here is I've got the Stormwater Management Program doc, and they believe 4 out of 6 of their master or their minimum control measures, they're going to have ordinances and code changes by February 28, 2023.
Okay.
So if you roll that back a year, that's probably a safe date by which we need to start actually getting something done.
Okay. That would have been nice if they had told me that. Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Keizer. Jeffrey, I just took something off the list right there.
So Shane, correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm not trying to rebut what I think Commissioner Watson brought up, but I think part of what you're asking with this list is sort of for Planning Commission to give you our priorities in terms of looking at this list and asking you to kind of go back to the drawing board on that, right?
Yes, absolutely. If there are things that you view as higher priorities, I definitely want to hear that. Because again, this is a laundry list of all the things that I know that we need to be working on. And as I said, some things are going to take priority because they happen, like a master plan. Other things are going to take priority because of state law changes, and so they have to happen. Right. But the other stuff, it really is dependent on what you all view as the greater priorities for our city.
Well, a lot of this stuff is aspirational, and I get that. And I think that consistent sort of with what Commissioner Watson said, I think a lot of this stuff we really need to kind of work towards the end goal, which is really being able to have a substantive discussion about the UGB. I think some of the challenges about the vision is we can have all the vision in the world we want, but unfortunately what it seems like is the state is handing down these sort of limitations and other issues that kind of tie our hands. And so if we ever want to have that conversation as it relates to opportunity zones for jobs and things like that, let me rephrase that, employment lands instead of opportunity zones, we really don't even get to have that conversation unless we have all these other things filled out. So the vision notwithstanding, I think there's some work that has to be done in order to get to that point where we can look at some additional opportunity for that jobs growth. And I think you kind of hit the nail on the head as it relates to the executive order and trying to go through all that, climate specific information. But just an observation there. I think that there's a lot of things on this list that are have tos in terms of trying to get as close to comporting with what the state is telling us we have to do. There's going to be the onesie twosies that sort of pop up, but maybe in terms of some of the aspirational ones, if it'd be good to hear from commissioners on which of those. But again, so much of this is predicated on unforeseen things that are coming down the pipeline, and it's kind of one of those deals where you said, yeah, we end up kind of kicking the can down the road a little bit, but it seems like every time we get to a point where we think we're doing good, then it's like, oh, just kidding, and we kind of have to circle back around on things. So just kind of a general observation of that. I mean, you're doing great work. We got a lot of stuff done. I'm going to coin the term COVIDed. I like that. I borrow that. I wrote that down on a sticky note. But I think from my perspective, we really need to be focusing on those things that we know that we have to, and those efficiency measures and some of those other things, hearing from Commissioner Grenson and Watson in terms of some of those things in the RCOD we can do to increase opportunity but minimize impact, I think are important. I will say that if you start building 4-story buildings in next to established neighborhoods that aren't in the RCOD, it is going to be problematic, but I think that's why we have the process where landowners and stuff like that come in and talk about things.
Sure.
But again, Commissioner Watson's right. I mean, we can't be reactive to what we don't necessarily know, but I think a lot of those sort of things are really, really important. So I'm going to be quiet for a second. I know Commissioner Herb's had her hand raised patiently for a few minutes.
Thank you, Chair Lawyer. So I have a couple of things, and I'm going to play my newbie card here because this one may not even be in our area, but just coming off 8 days without power, I'm wondering about other locations have their power lines buried rather than being up where trees can take them out. And is that something that a city can require when people are building the infrastructure in their developments? And is that something that we might take a look at and say, hey, anything new coming in, we want to bury those lines and just have them more protected? And then my second thing I would love to talk about, and this I think also has to do with our middle housing and our climate action. I have been reading about different developers that create very green buildings that are also very affordable. And of course, the aesthetic is always important too, and I want us to keep that in mind. But are we able to do incentives or anything like that in our codes, or when we're talking about different developments coming in, that they permit fees or taxes or anything like that if they choose to develop in those more environmentally sound and affordable ways?
Sure. Yeah, I'll do my best to kind of generally respond. I don't have solid answers for you on that second part of the question. As far as utilities go, though, we do currently require undergrounding in all new developments. Over the years, there have been a handful of times, depending on the private utility service provider, that sometimes that doesn't always happen exactly right. But I think that, historically, the city has undertaken some really large projects like that. Like River Road used to have all overhead power lines back in the day. And I think it was like maybe the first urban renewal district that was part of getting that done. Actually, Shannon would probably know better than I would. But I believe that it was like a big urban renewal project to underground those utilities. That wouldn't be something that would really be a planning commission role with the urban renewal district. It's a little different process. It's not really even a Shane role, frankly. But I think that absolutely we do have a requirement in our code currently that the new development utilities are supposed to be undergrounded unless there's some sort of special exemption. And I only know of like maybe 1 or 2 times where it's because an existing house and there was an overhead feed and they didn't make them abandon it, but it was like a Salem Electric call. It wasn't a city call. And But otherwise, normally what they do is they have to come at least down the pole and put everything underground on site. So that is something, I mean, it's hard. I think the bigger issue is you always, with the power grid in general, it's those transmission lines that get hit that kind of messed us up, at least those of us up in North Keizer that were out of power forever, like Mr. Lawyer and myself and whoever else lives up there. Yeah. Oh yeah, and Shannon was in like the black hole of no power for even longer than me.
Yeah, I was gonna say Gubster got hit, I think,
Yeah.
worse than probably most folks. I think they were almost 2 weeks.
Mark and I, our street, we were 8 days.
Yeah. So, okay. So yeah, you guys were in that same, yeah, I know I had some friends that were like, their neighbors were good and they were not. I was like, oh, that's the worst place to be. But yeah, I think that's fair, to bring that up. Now, I mean, as far as the secondary part of your question for, green building kind of incentives and whatnot, there's absolutely tools that a city could use. That being said, Keizer is extremely limited. To my knowledge, I don't believe that we have the power to give tax breaks, although I would have to defer to Shannon on that. The other thing that's difficult is that when a city like ours, we really run on a very lean budget, a lean staffing, and very low costs. And that's by design of our city charter, it's by design of our policymakers, and it kind of is a community expectation. And so I think what's hard is that if you incentivize a certain development and you say you start choosing to waive SDC fees or you reduce permitting fees, generally permit fees are things where we collect just a small percentage because we have an intergovernmental agreement where Marion County is actually getting most of that money. And so if we reduce fees, there would only be a small portion we would be able to reduce. And I appreciate what Commissioner Gren said earlier in that I do a lot of work that I don't always get compensated for from a cost effectiveness. And I think that is hard. I think from a philosophical point of view, I believe that's also one of the things that gives Keizer some distinct market advantages. And that's why developers love to work with us, because we are attentive and we're quick and we're fairly cost effective. But I think that there are some tools that would be available to the city as a whole. And if that was something that Planning Commission wanted to push forward as a whole, I could do some more research and see what else there is. I don't know off the top of my head what exactly we would really be able to do. And I always joke with folks, I guess now I am technically a department director. But I feel like the city's, I am, but I feel like the city's sort of like at my home. I don't really get trusted with the money too much. So I would have to talk to the finance director because ultimately anything that we incentivize monetarily, that ends up creating that collateral damage, so to speak, elsewhere in the city budgets. And frankly, our budgets are so tight that, our department, we had someone retire and our department shrunk, and that's just the way that it is sometimes. So I don't know if that answers your question, Commissioner Herb, but that's kind of what I can offer, unless Shannon, you have anything to add on that.
Well, I will pass on what the city manager said, and I haven't double checked him in a few years, but in a city our size, the ability for the city, the state has a lot more power, but the city has relatively little incentive kind of programs that we could do. The only thing that we could do is we could offer under local improvement district that's very localized. That allows financing of infrastructure. And there is such a thing as an enterprise zone, but that really is for bigger cities. And I think I might be mixed up. It might only be for counties. And like Shane mentioned, urban renewal district. The issue with the urban renewal district is we could do that again, but we'd be starting from scratch because as a promise to the other jurisdictions a few years ago, we sunsetted basically our urban renewal agency. So we'd be coming at it again, which has been talked about. I don't think it's impossible, but that'd be a council issue.
So I think what would be interesting to hear from, I know that there's organizations out there like Energy Trust of Oregon, and some of those other sort of organizations. And I think what would be good maybe from that perspective is to see sort of outside of the Planning Commission perspective, but just as a general opportunity for the city, and maybe the chamber can partner with this, but try to find an opportunity where some of those folks can come in and talk about some of those things. I mean, there's not a lot. They're not offering like tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars of rebates and stuff like that, but there are things out there that exist that can kind of help, make homes more, or have less of a footprint and all those other things, and then offer some rebates and things like that. Was there? I have another thought, but unless Jane's got any follow up on that.
Oh, I just wanted to say thank you, Chair Lawyer, and Shane and Shannon. Yes, I would love to hear what those tools are, and I like the idea that you just brought up, Matt, too, about hearing more about what options are there, and maybe it's not necessarily monetarily, maybe it's recognition or contests or just things like that, because people like to be recognized for how well they're doing, or contributing to their community and in their world. So just things to consider, but thank you for that. That's it for me.
So I'm going to throw a dart at the dartboard. As I'm looking at sort of the tasks, I feel like there's some natural sort of order of things. I think you get some of the low-hanging fruit issues first. So if I were going to offer kind of a prioritization list of about 3 or 4 items, what I would say is it seems like the section 2.130 for the RCOD text amendment would be a good one. That's quick. We could get it done. We could talk about the building heights and the street standards and all that kind of stuff quickly. Give it some thought. I think that Commissioner Grant's offered some good insight on that, and I think Commissioner Watson followed up on that. And so since it's still kind of fresh in our minds, that would be, again, my opinion, only a good one to kick off with, followed by probably section 2.302, which is the street standards, that kind of goes to some additional language for the surveyor office and all that other fun stuff. And then the general standards would be another easy one. So I think probably a couple of those we could sort of co-op them in one meeting. The master plan, depending on the timeliness of that one, might be a good one to sort of get in there. And then Shane, you said the rules are going to be done when? June this year?
No, so the rules are done. What I gave you guys is actually the adopted rules and the adopted model code. We are under compulsion to implement them no later than June of 2022. So we've got a while. And like I said, my intention was to kind of talk a little bit high level on that stuff once we were kind of done with the list. Although maybe that was the wrong approach, but the reason being is that it's definitely going to be a multi-step process, and there's a few reasons why. But before I jump into that, if I want to make sure I'm hearing from commissioners on anything else that they have, I see that Commissioner Grant has his hand up.
And actually, yeah, I think Commissioner Saldivar had his up as well just before, but he pulled it down. So go ahead.
So if I would like to offer some priorities from my perspective in terms of greatest bang for, Shane, your working dollar, I would say in terms of additional densities and squeezing as much of that out as we can early on in the implementation of the RCOD and some of this other stuff, I would say looking at the text amendment for parking, I would look at talking about the infill development standards, whether that's just the RCOD or get rid of it citywide, which would be my vote. That very well could lead into a discussion about building height in the multifamily zones. And then from there, yeah, I would defer to the couple other things that Chair Lawyer brought up. And I, as a commissioner, would really like to start diving into some of the nuts and bolts of HB 2001 and those OARs, and I've been thinking, you know, what's our ability to have just a work session, and maybe even outside of the normal once a month scheduled meeting. I'd be willing to put some time into that if that was an available option, because that's going to have a huge impact on our city. And I think I'd like to get into the nuts and bolts of that before we start talking about reducing the citywide single family lot sizes. So that's kind of my task list.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think it almost makes sense to kind of unpack House Bill 2001 and the rules almost first before we do anything. But yeah, Commissioner Saldivar.
Yeah, I'm gonna second that. I was thinking that maybe we need to have like a retreat or something, or a session outside, so that we can really, I was gonna say the exact same thing, to go through that House bill first, and then from there, then we can kind of formulate our plan on what we're doing in the future. And then on a separate point, I just wanted to kind of add a little bit or make a comment on Commissioner Herb's suggestion on the sustainable like building incentives. So one thing that I have seen in the different places I lived in, maybe finances are a difficult thing to add for support for those type of buildings, but I have seen that restrictions or removing restrictions also help aid in that. You know, when someone tries to do something sustainable, usually the building codes are not in line or keep up with the technology that comes out with either building materials, building styles, solar, wind usage, that type of stuff. And I'm not as familiar, unfortunately, in what Keizer has or doesn't have to help support those things. But if we could look into that, and that doesn't cost anything, and that is in our wheelhouse of things to look at to see if there are builders that can help facilitate that. I'm not an expert, but I used to teach sustainable energy at Montana State University Billings, and I've seen a lot of. I worked in Montana on how in many municipalities and try to make building green, let's say easier, but built into the code, because there's a lot of code that's restrictive, and a developer comes and wants to do something, and some places it can be very difficult to use like a SIP panel or, you know, conserve water, that type of stuff. And I know some of it's state law. You know, I know Oregon has different, you know, you can't keep your water on site, that type of stuff. You can only do 200 gallons or whatever it is. But there's some things that we might be able to do. That's all I wanted to add.
Okay.
So, Commissioner Grants, I'm just curious on your thoughts. I mean, because I guess for some reason I had the June date stuck in my head, and I don't know if that was June 2022 or if I'm just making something up from earlier today. Does it make more sense to try to get this thing unpacked and really kind of, because, you know, it's one of those things like redundancy, as much as Commissioner Watson loves going back and revisiting things that we've already talked about. What I don't want to do is, you know, if we go through these processes of doing these text amendments and we get through the rules and we go, just kidding. And it's not to say that Shane would have any oversight on it or miss some of those things, but it's kind of one of those things like, it's almost like, let's see what's before us before we really kind of start diving into some of this. I mean, unless you think that those two things you brought up are easy, low-hanging fruit thing that are not going to be necessarily driven by the changes in the rules. And if that's the case, I think that's a good prioritization. But I agree with you. I think diving into the rules is probably a really important thing to do.
Well, I have spent a little bit of time going through the OARs that Shane sent out, and those two items, at least the parking in the RCOD and the infill development standards, I believe that's just very, very easy, very ripe, low-hanging fruit that I don't think Shane would have to put much time into putting together staff report at all. That would potentially immediately allow projects to achieve greater densities.
And it doesn't hurt that it's almost construction season.
You know, if you're going through a project right now, you're kind of probably going to miss this construction season.
Okay.
Unless you're developing in Keizer. Very helpful.
So I think with that, I mean, you know, you live in this world every day of your life. And I think if we can knock those couple out and then really dedicate a lot of time kind of unpacking, you know, the retreat thing, I don't know that we can do a retreat. We can do a work session, but we can't necessarily do a retreat, right?
Yeah, a work session, Shannon, it would still have to be a public environment, televised, something like that, right?
Well, you certainly don't have to televise it. But yeah, it has to be a public meeting, it has to be recorded. So, you know, we could look at some creative options if you want to look at that.
Because this is going to be a big list. I mean, just to get through it and kind of talk about stuff. I mean, we're talking either a lot of hours over the course of one day or a few meetings.
Oh, it's a lot of stuff. And I mean, I think considering our need for housing, specifically middle housing,
Right.
I think the sooner we dive into this and start working some of these into our code, the better off we're going to be as a whole a year from now, 2 years from now. I don't see implementing all of the 2001 OARs in a single text amendment. I see it being 3 or 4 separate text amendments that might take 6 months. Shane, correct me if I'm wrong.
No, I mean, I think if planning commissioners have kind of said their minds on the list, I think that is kind of a perfect segue into giving you a little bit of Shane's vision for House Bill 2001 and what we might be looking at doing. But obviously, if there's no other questions, I'll kind of jump in and talk about it a little bit, if that's okay. But I won't spend too much time because it's getting on at 7:15 already. But was there anything else that anybody wanted to add as far as the list goes? I feel like I have gotten some good direction from you all. I kind of have a general consensus, which is good because I think generally it lines up with where I was leaning, although there were some great points brought up that I had not thought about. But now that I'm hearing you bring them up, I have no problem dialing some stuff up for consideration over the course of the next few months. We're definitely going to be busy. Like I said, May, I'm going to be asking you guys to go to 2 different meetings already. Go ahead, Chair.
So with the TSP, I mean, we have the Traffic Bikeways Pedestrian Committee. Are they going to, I guess the question is, I don't want to get us bogged down. Can they lift some of this, right?
Yeah, no. So, I mean, the TSP is a big outlier. I put it on the list because it's a significant project if we get it.
Okay.
I think there's a question in my mind of, do we even really get funding? You know, if I would control the purse strings at the state, I might say, I want to wait till after this scenario planning stuff is done before I fund a TSP update for you.
Okay.
So there's a big, and I think that ultimately what would probably happen with a TSP update, because we generally with big projects like that, we have a technical advisory committee and a citizen advisory committee. So what I would probably need at a bare minimum is representation from Planning Commission on that technical advisory committee, which would be additional different meetings that wouldn't be to the Planning Commission as a whole. So it wouldn't affect all of you, but somebody would be the volunteer if we go that route. So yeah, I think that's one where, you know, and ultimately, Matt, it may not happen in this cycle anyway. We may not get the funding. I sent an email to the state trying to have a conversation. I still haven't heard back from them. But like I said, I'm making a pre-application and we'll kind of go from there on that. So yeah, I think ultimately what I'm hearing y'all say, it gives me enough direction that don't worry, I will keep you busy. We'll have things to consider. You know, and ultimately one of the elements here is, you know, again, going back to our efficiency measures kind of discussion back in September, I definitely had gotten the feeling that, hey, we want to be cautious. We want to take it slow. We don't want to necessarily overreach more than we're required to do. But at the same time, I'm hearing some thoughts tonight, which do line up with, hey, if we make some changes now, we can maybe catalyze and capitalize on that land we do have left to see development being able to happen that makes sense. And so I think that gives me what I need in that vein. So that being said, jumping into House Bill 2001, the way that I kind of envision us tackling it, because it's a significant shift for the state. I mean, it was in rulemaking for a long time. I've held off on giving you official information because, you know, frankly, it wasn't adopted until late December, and I wanted to make sure there weren't any appeals or anything got held up in courts or anything like that. So what I've sent you is what the final kind of version is. And in Shane's mind, at least, I do not envision our city as adopting that model code, you know, verbatim. One, the structure is all wonky compared to the existing development code. Two, there are some things that the model code is basically doing that is more than the minimum OARs require. It would be my opinion, based on knowing the Planning Commission and knowing City Council, that we would probably want to tend to stick closer to what is required of us and not reach farther than that necessarily. But that's just my initial kind of knee-jerk reaction of looking through the information and seeing what's there. What I would imagine, or what I envision us doing, and I hesitate to even say this because it commits me to a ton of work, but what I've envisioned that we would do is that, you know, again, we've got a couple small text amendments, we've got a couple of other things with HNA BLI stuff and some other meetings. We have some things that might come up and take on that time, but what I would ultimately like to do is be able to have at one of our future meetings in the next few months is to basically provide you guys with a little presentation, probably do a PowerPoint and give some kind of bullets, some highlights, and actually pull out and look at some things. I've chatted with our GIS staff about trying to create some visuals for us all to be able to see, and I haven't had time to do the analysis myself yet, but trying to look based on some of the lot sizes that are identified, you know, how many properties does this affect in Keizer? You know, we know duplexes could go everywhere, but there's also some reality with assessed values and how much properties cost and turnover and all of that. So, I mean, I think one thing that I want to make sure that I remind Planning Commission of is that while this is a big lift, and I agree with Commissioner Grenz, this is not something that, I mean, it's going to be amending a lot of sections of our code, all the residential zones, design standards, process, there's a lot. Go ahead, Chair Lawyer.
So we have a consultant right now doing the HNA BLI. Is there any way they could take this and sort of do that homework for you?
Well, they have some of that information is identified in our buildable lands inventory, but we also have some GIS staff on staff.
Okay. Right.
And I'd had conversations with them, and I said, you know, if you were to create me some maps based on parcel size and zoning and kind of spit out a few queries, how much time does that take you?
Okay.
And Sue is great, and Sue was like, oh no, I can rock that for you, no problem. So I think we'll be okay with that. And I hesitate to pursue hiring a consulting firm to help us through the text amendment process, although there are other cities that's exactly what they're doing. I don't think it's necessary for us because I think it's a fairly straightforward path for what we're looking to change. That being said, I did want to at least give you guys some kind of highlights or lowlights, depending on what your perspective is, of House Bill 2001, so we kind of understand what we're talking about. And so from that general overview, it is this middle housing concept to provide additional housing types within the fabric of existing neighborhoods so that basically communities are not as homogeneously single-family detached dwellings. And so in that, we only have control over what's allowed. We still don't control what the market drives. So I do not expect in Keizer that we will see every home in Keizer turn into a duplex and every 5,000 or 6,000 square foot lot turn into a triplex. I think we will see some of that, but it's going to be driven also by market factors. You know, ADUs have been on the books now for a long time, but the relaxed standards have been on the books for the past like 3 or 4 years. And we've generally seen about 5 ADUs a year, maybe in that time. We haven't seen a ton. It's not like everybody went out immediately and built an ADU because they cost a bunch of money to build. So, our land values in Keizer are pretty high. So the likelihood of a developer coming in and buying a $400,000 home to tear it down and build a duplex, the return on investment isn't going to be there for them necessarily. So there are some things in the bill, though, that I want to kind of make you aware of. And that's one of the reasons why I would agree with Commissioner Grenz, and I think some of those changes to the RCOD zone and some other things that we can do now, they wouldn't necessarily conflict. So one of the pieces that I do think is going to be, could have a significant implication in how the standards get put forth would live with a policy decision for Planning Commission to consider. And right out the chute, the bill says that we have to allow a duplex on every lot. We don't get a choice on that. But for triplexes and quadplexes, it says that the city may allow either attached or detached triplexes and quadplexes. So one of the things that I would ask you to consider as you kind of do some homework and read through the stuff is think about, from your perspectives, what that might mean. I have some opinions on it, but I don't want to paint your opinions a certain way yet because I haven't had enough time to vet it. But I think there's a significant difference between saying a triplex that's an attached 3 units in one building structure is allowed versus saying you have a single family home and you can build a new duplex in the backyard and call it a triplex. There's a very different scale of impact that could happen with those two things. And I think that there's a different scale of probability on what will happen depending on the policy we choose to move forward as a commission and ultimately as a council in adopting these standards. Now, the model code, that is recommending that you allow it either way. Be as flexible as you want to be, allow basically up to 4 units on any lot that is 7,000 square feet or more. My knee-jerk reaction, being a longtime citizen and homeowner in Keizer, I'm not sure that that's the best bet for Keizer personally. But that's something that I think will be something that's one of those specific deals where we have to allow this and we can allow this. And so that's going to be a policy that Planning Commission needs to struggle and wrestle with to figure out what makes the most sense for Keizer. Another piece, just to kind of give you a heads up, again, I said triplexes are going to be allowed on lots of 5,000 square feet, which is what we allow a single family home on currently. And so in my mind, lowering minimum lot size for single family dwellings to 4,000 square feet, well, maybe that makes sense because if we're going to allow a single family home or a triplex on a 5,000 square foot lot, it seems like triplex should be on a little bit bigger piece of property. But that's what the bill says, is that 5,000 square feet, a triplex will have to be allowed. And at 7,000 square feet, a fourplex would have to be allowed, as well as cottage clusters. Commissioner Saldivar.
I was just going to say, so even if a triplex on 5,000 square foot, those are small. I mean, like 1,000 square foot unit. And you're not going to get they're going to have to be attached. You're not going to be able to do 3 detached buildings on 5,000 square feet. That's not possible to do. Yep. So some of that, and I did want to ask a question. So when we're talking about the difference between, or the impacts in Keizer of allowing a triplex being, like you said, a single family home and then a duplex in the backyard. How many, we don't have, based on the meeting we had, was it last month? We don't have very many open lots. So, a triplex of decent size is going to have to be built on either you're buying a house and tearing it down, so you have street access for 3 garages or what have you, or you're going to have to buy a house that's on a half acre or an acre and put something in the back. Those are your only 2 options. And we have a lot more land infill wise that people have on an acre or 2 acres that's going to see those type of developments. And we do a vacant lot that's going to be able to build a duplex or triplex or quadplex like you would at any, a normal standard one that has street access for all 4 units.
Yeah, no, and I think you're correct. The one thing I would say though that's a little bit different is that when they are analyzing the buildable lands inventory based on vacant or undeveloped or underdeveloped parcels, they
Right.
use a little different metric in their model that is based on some of the state goals and rules for basically some safe harbor provisions for how large a lot has to be to consider redevelopment. And that what we've seen in Keizer, we do have a significant, well, we have a fair amount of parcels in both West Keizer and Southeast Keizer that are fairly large and deep based on urban standards.
Right.
Especially West Keizer, where you look at that and go, oh, all these are 1/4 acre lots or 1/3 of an acre lots, where they're not quite big enough to divide because of things like fire access for having a legal access point to a public street. They can't put an access easement down, but a lot of those lots, they would easily be able to add additional units in the back and build a walkway to it.
Correct.
Because they don't have to, because they're not creating a land division. So that's where I'm hoping that I can provide some kind of actual map analysis to show what sized parcels and where we could see this type of development. And so that's, in my mind, because literally I've been processing infill partitions since 2000.
Right.
You know, we've seen a lot of lots where with these new rules, you'd have a lot of developers go, oh, I can't divide it in 2 different pieces. But man, if I want to keep it as a rental, I can build a whole nother house in the backyard and not have to do anything. And so that's where I think from a policy perspective, there needs to be consideration given on what are the thresholds that we think are right for our community. Because we've adopted ADU standards, and we could have let ADUs be much larger than we did, but we capped it at 750 square feet. We said, hey, it needs to be subservient to the main house. There's some things like that, you know, as we go through it, that's something that I kind of want to just have you guys be aware of and be thinking about. You know, the other thing that I kind of want to bring up is the OARs actually go so far as to talk a little bit about setbacks also for some of the uses, and where a triplex or a fourplex, we can't require greater setbacks on those than we would for just a single family home. So essentially, whatever we allow as a single family home, we're going to have to kind of allow for these new unit types. And so one of the issues we always get into is neighborhood compatibility, and we want to be careful about that. There's a limited set of tools, though, that we can use to create protections for established neighborhoods. But I do think one of those may be things like saying, hey, duplexes need to be a real duplex. It needs to be attached. Triplexes need to be a real triplex. It needs to be attached, because I think, Mr. Saldivar, you're absolutely right. A lot of those lots that are there, even if they are a little larger, they're not going to make sense for redevelopment in going that route. And so maybe what's more appropriate is, okay, you've got an option for ADU development or something a little different, which still gives more housing, but not everything. The other thing that I kind of had written down that just kind of wanted you to be aware of, you know, with our code, like I said, the way I would envision us going through this is probably having a meeting where I'll be able to kind of dial in and kind of walk you through some of the provisions and what it means for us, and kind of compare, here's what we currently allow, here's some things that we're going to have to allow. But so how do I put it? So I don't think it's something that we can necessarily adopt this model code as a standalone section. It needs to be incorporated into all of the sections of our code, one. And then there are some things like with cottage clusters where we basically have said, hey, since 2013, we've allowed cottage clusters. We've never seen one built, but it also went through a land use approval process that went to council, not something that was like a building permit. Moving forward, all of these middle housing types, you can't put them through a more arduous development review process or approval process than a standard single family home. So that's something that, and we're limited on what design standards can be there. So that's more than anything, just kind of giving you guys all a heads up that, yeah, we're going to have to adopt some things. And I think we want to be a little bit careful about what we choose to allow in the areas that we can control. I had a webinar last week, which was with the state, which was kind of going through some of these things. I asked, I think, 3 separate questions. One was, what about lot widths? Do I have any ability to establish standards for lot widths? Because as Commissioner Saldivar so accurately said, with a narrow single family lot, how are you going to fit a triplex on it? It's not wide enough. It's got to be super skinny and tiny units. I asked that question of the state. They've said that they have already been asked that question by others, and that the DOJ is supposed to be giving an opinion on that. And the question becomes whether or not some of those standards, like if we wanted to adopt a larger lot width for duplexes versus triplexes versus quads, actually we couldn't do it for duplexes. It has to be the same as the houses. But for triplexes and quads, the OAR is silent on it. The question becomes does it fall into the threshold of being an undue burden, a hardship, timing, or expense? And basically DLCD said, well, we would strongly caution you against that, but we are asking for that. I'm supposedly going to see some sort of written opinions on some of the interpretations of the OARs. So that was one of my questions. Another of my questions is currently in Keizer, when you do multifamily development, frontage improvements are automatically required because it's multifamily development. It does not sound like we will be able to require that with these middle housing provisions. So basically up to a 4-plex, we may lose the ability to get frontage improvements at all. Now, it would still apply to larger multifamily complexes, but that's something that I have some concerns on because a lot of our larger lots happen to be in areas where we lack frontage improvements currently. So that's kind of, again, to be determined. I basically asked them 3 questions and they couldn't answer any of them for me. So that was great. But as I said, I'm hoping that we will be getting some actual written guidance out of the Department of Justice that kind of gives some clarity on, okay, what is the interpretation of these administrative rules? Because what we know right now is we know that the OARs are changed, and we know that if we choose to adopt the model code, we're good. That model code represents a fair implementation of the rules as vetted by DLCD. Now, I don't want to adopt the model code for a number of reasons. And so whatever we choose to adopt will still have to be vetted and acknowledged by DLCD in order to be effective. And if what we adopt doesn't do that, then come June of 2022, if somebody comes in and files an application, they would be able to do so under that model code, and I would not be able to stop them unless we've changed our rules and they're determined to be consistent with the OARs. So some of that DOJ guidance is going to be necessary as we work through the nuts and bolts, black and white, of what the text says. So that's just kind of to give you that brief overview of kind of the highlights of what the bill's going to do. And then there's some other things in there, and I don't know what it means, and nobody seems to be real straight with me. But the other thing it talks about is the fact that when we adopt these provisions, we have to demonstrate consideration for things such as SDC waivers or incentivizing, something that Commissioner Herb kind of alluded to earlier for green building. But they're saying that a city has to basically say they've considered something like that. They've considered possibly construction excise taxes or other measures that would be supportive of affordability in the housing. Because one of the pieces with this particular House bill is it was really sold under the guise of dealing with the housing affordability crisis by providing more housing choice and more affordable housing options by nature of, hey, a smaller, different type of home maybe cost less than that detached single family dwelling. So, obviously there's some questions that we still are going to have to struggle and wrestle through. But what I'm kind of asking for you guys for tonight is take a look through those OARs, take a look through that model code, and as you have questions or concerns, please reach out to me, shoot me an email, give me a phone call, because frankly, the more eyes we can have on it as we move forward and strategize how to get the changes dialed up and adopted, the better for me, the better for you. So, and with that, I will be done talking about it.
Hey, remember at the beginning of this when you said this should be a, yeah. I'm just kidding. No, I think it's a lot of really good information. Yeah, I would second what Shane said. I think, Commissioner Grants, you've already done a lot of work diving into this, and I appreciate that very much. I think it's going to be really helpful. I think that's incumbent on all of us, just spend a little bit of time in it. Shane, I don't know if there's a better method than just having 7 commissioners come at you randomly to talk about specific things. I know with other committees that I've worked on, we've been able to break down into smaller subcommittees that don't require quorum issues or anything like that. So I don't know if we want to maybe look at a concept like that where we kind of break off into 2 or 3 groups, talk about some things, work through some things, and then come back with some questions. I don't know. I mean, and I think that's something we can consider at the next meeting. I would encourage the other commissioners to think about that and to see if that's an approach that we want to take, so that we're being efficient with looking at how we're approaching this. Because, you have 7 different commissioners with 7 different ways to read and interpret what we're seeing. And it is going to be extremely tough on you and Dina to be able to look at that and say, okay, well, this is what I think. And then, anyways, I don't want to.
Yeah, and I think initially, Chair Lawyer, what I would recommend is that if you all can kind of review the information and kind of compile questions/concerns, then what I would like to be able to do is maybe after I kind of we actually will devote one of our planning commission meetings to kind of getting into it, like actual language, and I will come up with kind of some more than what we just talked about, which is just kind of like a few little bullet points. I think that would be what I would want to do, is kind of see how many of those questions I would answer in that process. Also, how many questions I've gotten answered for the feelers I've put out to the state already. And then move forward. And I like your idea, though. That may be something that we could look at as possibly divvying up some work and saying, hey, how about you look at this issue, you all look at this issue, and kind of figure it out. But I like that idea.
Yeah, it's either that or, everybody just sends you your questions, then you do the, one of these things is not like another, and get rid of all the ones that are duplicates and then come back with some responses. But I think in the interest of time, unless any other commissioners got something that's just burning at their fingertips wanting to talk about, like to kind of move forward. Good. All right. So again, thanks, Shane. It is remarkable to reflect on all the work that was done, even though things were coveted, using that again. And thank you to all the commissioners for continuing to stay flexible and work through a lot of these issues. Zoom is not the easiest thing to deal with things. So we'll move on to the council liaison report. And Councilor Duran, if you've got anything for us this evening.
I don't have anything. So, not at this time.
You've always been a man of very little words, but I think that might take the cake.
I was trying to be as quick as possible.
Fair enough. Okay, so we have Council Representative Commissioner Watson on March 15th. Are you good for that, or do you need to back up?
No problem. I can get that.
Okay, so April 14th. I think the council has moved more towards they're going to go to in-person meetings until such time as OHA or somebody else says no. So do we have a consensus one way or another on how we want to go? Actually, we need a motion on that, don't we, Shane, on the meeting?
Yes.
Okay. So I guess we talk a little bit in-person or virtual. Any feelings strong one way or another?
Y'all still wearing masks?
Yep.
Then I'm indifferent.
All right. Well, somebody put a motion on the table for in person or virtual?
I move that we meet at our next meeting, April 14th, in person.
Okay.
I'll second it.
Who was that? I lost.
Mark.
Oh, thank you, Mark. All right, so a motion to meet in April in person, and the second by, I don't even know what I just said. Let me try that over again. We had a motion to meet in person in April by Commissioner Granson, a second by Commissioner Collier. Any discussion on that? So I guess the question I'd have, City Attorney, is with the work session with the council in May, that's virtual, correct?
Yes.
Yes. So do we need to, well, okay.
You don't need to make a motion about that. That's
Okay.
the
What's
council.
the May date again?
19th.
19th. Okay, so any other discussion on the motion in front of us? All right, all those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, so the motion passes unanimously with one absent. All right, there is one, by the way, this Saturday, Rotary hosted Civic Center cleanup. Get there about 8:30 to start signing up and get in your groups and get all the waivers done. A lot of work. And since Commissioner Collier, this is his baby, let him talk a little bit about that.
Well, it looks like we're going to have a lot of volunteers, but I don't want to jinx us too bad. We'll start at 8 o'clock. Hopefully, it'll start at 9 o'clock. We'll hopefully be done by noon, like always. If you get there a little early, Matt's going to be running the operation because I have a prior engagement I cannot get out of. But we're working starting tomorrow trimming. We'll be finishing trimming Friday. We'll have things set up on Friday, and then Matt will be there early Saturday morning to stage things. We'll be following all COVID practices. We also have a group that will be providing hamburgers once the work is done, because just like when you have people come over to move, you don't break the beer out until it's all done. And so that's we will be having lunch after the work's done, and it should be a great day. And just bring your gloves, dress for the weather, wear some closed-toed shoes. If you have a rake, bring that. A plastic garbage can works great. And we'll keep you in your little groups as you show up, or we'll figure things out. But we will have masks, require masks, and have masks available, sanitizer available, some light refreshments like something to drink and such. And we'll not be going in the community center, City Hall at all. We'll be using the restroom at Chalmers Park and at the Parks shop. And so it'll be an interesting time, but hopefully a fun time.
All right. Thank you. It's a good project. A lot of fun. All right. So unless there's anything else, we'll go ahead. Nobody. We'll call the March 10th Planning Commission meeting adjourned at 7:48. Thank you, guys and gals and everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.